So you've been following me for a while and you've heard me talk about this midlife valuation, this free one-on-one coaching session for an hour that you can do with me. And you're curious about it, but not so curious that you would actually sign up. Like that seems like a lot of work. And I understand. And so what I wanted to do this fall is really share with you what goes down in one of those evaluations. And so today's podcast is going to be a deep dive into that. I have a former group coaching client who graduated from the Learn to Love Your Story 20-week group coaching program that goes with my online courses. She's well on her way to creating a centered life thriving. In fact, she is kind of a unique case because she's already knee deep in making some really significant changes in her life. So we discovered during group coaching that occupation was one of those areas that she had kind of led herself down the track of, I've been working at the same job and longevity is important and sticking with something is important, except that that part of her life didn't feel centered. It didn't feel like it was making her thrive. She just felt like she was, punching in and punching out, and she wanted more out of her life. And so she's already kind of midstream in some major change processes. And sometimes that's where you're at, those of you that are listening to me, and sometimes not. But I would just give yourself some time to sit down and listen to this particular midlife valuation. Amy and I are going to go through what the midlife valuation report looks like. And that, if you're watching me on YouTube, could be really useful just to see what the structure is like and to hear it if you're listening to me on a podcast, just to hear it, just to walk through it, and just to get an idea of what is it that I really could offer you without any cost to you. It's actually really valuable stuff. So this first midlife valuation and having Amy on as a guest, as one of my coaching clients, this will be unique. I may continue to drop versions of these, but those podcasts will look a little bit more like I'll take one little excerpt from the coaching session, and then I'll expound on that and talk to you about what you could do, or kind of give you more information than I give in just the little next steps that I talk about in the midlife valuation report itself. And so you have just more information, more things that you can tuck in to your skill set. So keep listening today, because it's really quite valuable to do one of these one-on-one sessions with me. And I think that listening to one of these front to back is going to help you see how this midlife valuation really could set you up for a centered life thriving. And more than that, I'm going to give you a bunch of tidbits of information that'll be useful not only to Amy, who I did the coaching session with, but to you as well, because I'm guessing some of the things she's struggling with are things that you're struggling with too.
I know your deep, dark secret. You don't like your life. You're a woman in midlife, and for the past 2 decades or more, you've poured yourself in to other people. You've poured yourself into your career, your family, and yet on the inside, you feel broken. And that's no way to be. I'm Dr. Natalie Marr. I'm a clinical psychologist and a life transition expert. It wasn't too long ago that I was in your shoes, waking up in my early 40s, thinking I've got 2 failed marriages and I'm a single mom for the second time in my life. And I just knew that I could do better, that I could feel better. Fortunately for you, I have about 20 years experience clinically. And so I've created a method that will help you learn to love your story. I know that the story that you're telling yourself about your life feels awful. And I know that you think that you can't change that. I assure you, you can. And when we work together, I'm going to help you to craft a different story, a story that you love, a story that makes you want to get up every single day.
Welcome back, everybody. It is so exciting. We're going to listen to an entire one-on-one coaching session with one of the graduates of my group coaching program for Learn to Love Your Story. Amy is so gracefully accepted the one-on-one free coaching session. And what we did is we recorded her hour, and she gave me permission to share that with you on the podcast today. So what we're going to walk through today is literally the discussion she and I had. What happens with these midlife valuations is you're going to complete an online, that's about 60 to 70 questionnaire. Doesn't really take that long. I think most people say they can knock it out in about 10 minutes, maybe 20 if you're really reading into some of the questions. But it's like, hey, just rank this on a scale of 1 to 5. It's not a big deal, right? I'm not asking you to write any essays. It's just click here, click here, click here, click here. Pretty easy to do. But the beauty of this valuation report is this. I'm a psychologist by trade, right? So I have drawn these questions out from other psychometrics that I know work and help me to kind of rank order in the 5 areas of the Learn to Love Your Story program. Where are your strengths and where are your vulnerabilities? What are those 5 areas? Great thing to ask and great thing to start with. And you'll see this if you're watching me on YouTube, because you will get to see the actual results of the midlife valuation report for Amy. And it clearly shows you these 5 areas. But my 5 areas are having self-awareness, having self-compassion. And I do talk about those two together. I tie them together as compassionate self-awareness. I've been talking about that on the podcast, so that should come as no surprise to you. The third area, it's self-empowerment is what we're going to be working towards. But what the questionnaire is going to pick up on for me is, where are you at in your midlife? Where are you at in evaluating your midlife? Does it feel good? Does it feel like you're on track? Or does it feel stagnant? Do you feel a little stuck right now? It's going to give me that information. And that's really important information for me to then be able to give you some advice and suggestions on how to move forward. Now, like I had said in the intro, Amy here in her self-empowerment category is well on her way because she's made some huge changes in her life, huge strides towards that centered life thriving. And so her advice gets a little bit different in that little section, but I'm hoping that later in the fall, I'll be able to share with you another coaching session or so where that is not the case in that middle ground, because I do know there are some of you out there that want change but feel stagnant and want to hear a little bit more about that and how you loosen that up and move through that. So that's category 3. Category 4 is self-care, and not just your mama's, version of self-care, not Cosmo's version of self-care. Okay. I'm talking about a level of self-nurturance and a level of creating a relationship with yourself where the first thing in the morning that you're thinking about is, how do I take care of me today and what serves me most? The middle thing you think about is that, and the last thing of the day you think about is that. Now, this is flipping on its head this premise that thinking of yourself first is selfish. In my online course, I call this Selfish is the New Selfless. That's the course, right? Because I want to flip it on its head. Here's what I know to be true, that women who prioritize self-care and value and take care of the worth that they bring to the world then do better in all categories of their life. They don't feel as stuck. They don't feel burnt out. They don't feel like they're always giving to other people and never receiving back. When they flip it on its head, what actually happens is that they have more energy for the people they care for and the things that they care for. It seems weird that it would work that way, but I'm telling you that the reason it feels weird is because you've got a lot of programming and conditioning that has been fed to you that tells you, hey, that's selfish. If you do you first, what's happening to all these people that depend on you? And unfortunately, we don't question that logic, but that logic makes literally no sense. If you're the tool that goes out into the world to do all of those things, but you're not taken care of, what are you going how are you going to accomplish all of that, right? If you don't put gas in the gas tank for this vehicle, where are you taking anybody? Nowhere. That's the problem. And so that's the kind of self-care that we talk about. And that almost always comes up in my coaching sessions because there's still a lot of programming and conditioning, some unlearning that women need to do around that area. A lot of you come in with this idea that self-care is healthy, even you're doing a healthy amount of it, but you're still in the mindset that it's what lets you do all the work in your life. It's like, oh, well, self-care is kind of a necessary evil that I have to do to be able to manage my stress and manage my workloads and manage my caretaking and all of my responsibilities. And I'm still working on even that group of people that's good at doing self-care to shift into the mindset that self-care is about nurturing this human. She is the only one you've been given. She is your sole purpose in life. And if you do it well enough and you love her well enough, she will do for you all the things that you want and more. Okay. So that's number 4. Number 5 is really called a growth mindset. And this is a concept that's Carol Dweck has put a lot of research, written a book on, and really has helped us to understand that the flexibility in our thinking really helps us to stay in a constant state of being able to pivot out of anything in life, right? Being able to not just feel like you arrive and then you stay in the perfect state, but that perfect is just not a thing, that we're always challenging ourselves to grow, that we're always looking to be the most excellent version of us today, but that the potential is that we could be more excellent tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So those are my 5 areas: self-awareness, self-compassion, self-empowerment, self-care, and having a growth mindset. That's what helps us get into the self-transformation that brings you that centered life thriving. So let's take a listen to this coaching session that I did with Amy and see if you can, first of all, just educate yourself on what the coaching sessions look like and what the value they have and what they could bring you. But also maybe there's a little nugget here for you today. I hope there is.
Welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for joining me. I am excited to get started. I've been looking at your results. You've got some really great information, really great things to do, work with here. First off, just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what your story is.
Well, I first encountered Dr. Natalie quite a while ago. And when she came up with this new group coaching idea, I thought I would give it a try. Having done the same job for 20 plus years and kind of had the same patterns and routines for most of my adult life, and having done only one job, looking at younger coworkers who were switching jobs at the drop of a hat when they didn't like something, and oh, maybe I need to do some things that are different so that the rest of my life is the best of it. And I'm not just constantly looking backwards about all the great things that happened before.
Now that you say that, Amy, I remember that in our group too, that you were at the front end of facing this work, kind of, it wasn't that you didn't like your work because you love your work, but you didn't like circumstances that kind of fed into the workplace environment. I think so many of us could empathize with that. And so I do remember that during the program, you kept your focus on that shifting. That I want to be kind of stepping into a part of my life where I enjoy the work I do, and it's a joyful, fun, rewarding experience, and not something that I just feel like I have to do, or that the best of it is behind me. That didn't seem enticing, which honestly, as you say it all, that doesn't sound enticing to anybody, I'm sure. So I understand why you were in that space. Thanks. Thank you for sharing that with us. Tell me today, what would you like to get from this midlife mastery evaluation? Thank you for agreeing to do this, to show my listeners what this can do for them. As one of my graduates, but tell me, what would you like to be able to get out of this?
Just to further my understanding of what I learned during the group coaching, and to increase the number of tools I have in my toolbox to continue to live my best life.
Tell us this, how do you feel about the tools that you already have in place? So you have gone through the coaching program,
You came to the coaching program with a fair amount of your own tools. How do you feel you're faring at this point in your midlife?
Um, I feel like I've learned how to own my life and to really know that I'm in charge. And if I don't like something, I can change it or do it different or do
Mm-hmm.
something else.
So
And
that
I'm having
agency
fun.
is something that you really stepped into, which honestly, I'll get to a little bit later in your results, but that showed up with, shining colors. There's, always some other things that show up. So I look at it from like strength and vulnerabilities and the questionnaire. How bad was the questionnaire? Tell my listeners, how bad was it to finish that? I can't remember how many questions are on it. Maybe 60 total. So it's lengthy, but how bad was it for you to go through and answer?
It actually was pretty quick and easy. And I did that at the end of my first week at a new school with a different age group of students. No problem. So
Awesome.
my answers might reflect a little bit of that too.
That's okay. No, that's awesome. Great. Thank you. Thank you for putting that out there because I think I, want everybody to know I make this as easy as I possibly can, but I am looking for some key indicators that kind of show where our vulnerabilities and resiliency skills are in midlife. And I can then navigate this midlife mastery evaluation to be very specific to here, you're doing this great. So keep that up or use this strength in this way, because here is a place where you're still vulnerable, still growing, and you may want to kind of compensate or kind of use this resiliency skill to kind of cover up that vulnerability. So it's specifically looking at what we know are in life transition, some of the core areas that you really need to be able to have skill sets in. No mistake. It's also the 5 areas that I teach on in my courses. And it's also the 5 areas that Amy went through in group coaching. So they're all the same. So I ask questions in those content areas, but then I'm able to give you some specific feedback. I don't think that taking the midlife mastery evaluation means that you're in midlife crisis, that's when I want you to do it. In fact, I would tell you to go see a therapist. If you're in that space, there's a lot more that we can do to assist you in the field of mental health. This really is for those of us that kind of feel pretty good about where things are at, but might have some areas where we have some awareness we'd like to keep growing in. Maybe we don't have awareness, we need to keep growing in them. But for whatever reason, we're still looking for something more, something just a little bit more to help us out, like Amy is saying that she's ready. So I thought she'd be a great first example for you guys of this midlife mastery evaluation process. Well, let's dive in. I'm just so grateful that you are a loyal listener and that what I'm delivering here is something that you want to be listening to each and every week. There are just other ways that you can be working with me through learntoloveyourstory.com, and I want to make sure that you know what those are. Now, for starters, all of these are links that you would find in the notes for every single podcast. And if you found me in a post on learntoloveyourstory.com, all of these links are there as well. But there are 3 ways that you can work with me. The first, and the one that I really strongly recommend, is join my Facebook group, join my community. This is a place where we can all talk with one another about what you're hearing me put out on podcasts, write in my blogs, and you really get some support, some community around making change, working towards that centered life thriving that you want. The second thing is I have a whole set of courses online, all there, right there for you, that will teach you and walk you through with workbooks, with guided meditations. So if you haven't seen that, you should at least go over and browse. And then my last and my favorite way is to meet with you one-on-one. I do a free consultation for an entire hour. It's called a midlife valuation. And that's what we're going to do. Look at the value of your midlife. We're going to compare that to the goals that you have for yourself. And we're going to help you come up with a plan where there's gaps there. And it's all free to you. So these are the 3 ways to get started working with me. In another way, if you're loving what you're hearing. All right. So once you have completed that questionnaire, I get to work and I put together a really nice midlife valuation report for you. And it comes kind of looking like this. So we're going to go through a few of the different tables and suggestions or highlights that I give you as part of that valuation report with Amy's results. And so some of what you see here will look familiar if you decide to go online and do this. And by the way, if this is starting to intrigue you, I will make sure there's a link in the notes for today's podcast or YouTube video, depending on where you're finding me, so that you can just link straight in to setting this up for yourself. So here's our first page, and our first page goes through the 5 areas. And so just to kind of recap, my 5 areas that I teach about are self-awareness, self-compassion, self-empowerment, self-care, and having a growth mindset. And I teach them in that order, or when I was doing group coaching, I taught them in that order, and I've put them in that order in my courses online because I find it important to kind of create one skill before you layer on the next skill. And I would just be curious, Amy, do you want to share with my listeners your perspective of when you went through group coaching? Was that an important feature of this, that you layered them in that way?
Absolutely.
Good.
It builds very much like learning how to do math or how to do reading. You have to do step 1 before you can do step 2.
Right, right. Compassionate self-awareness. So I teach self-awareness, then self-compassion, and then we talk about it from that point forward. I've talked about it on my podcast, as this idea of compassionate self-awareness is really a key skill set that lets you do the other 3 things. So before you can really talk about self-care for real, like what it really is, you have to have compassionate self-awareness, because you may be still buying into culture's idea of what self-care is. It's chocolate and taking a break and indulgences and ways to escape my life and, feel better for a little while because my life is really tough and stressful. Well, self-care really is about the things that we do to stay inside our lives. And I don't think you can get there without compassionate self-awareness of what's getting in the way of why you don't want to be in your life and you are escaping it at all times. So that's just an example of kind of how those things layer in. But here is how in self-awareness, you're doing really well. You have kind of a moderate level of self-awareness, which honestly for most of us is fantastic. Most of us function in a lot of unawareness a lot of the time. Some people call this denial. I like to call it unawareness because I don't think that people intentionally don't know that they don't know. They just don't know. So this is a great start. And definitely I could see in the way that you were responding that you're using the skills that were taught in the group coaching and that continue to help you in your life. The one place where I started to see a little bit of vulnerability for you is in knowing and asking for help when you need it. And that came up not just in the questions that were in the self-awareness section, but a little bit later it came up again. So you do have some self-awareness of wanting to improve in this, but I think what I would encourage you to start thinking about is ways to improve areas of my life to know when I should ask for help, or it would be a good idea for me to get some help, and how to do that, or how to ask for that at that time. So you're right there with most of us. I would raise my hand. This is definitely an area that I continue to work on. And I know a little bit about your story. And I know, I've shared on the podcast a lot about my story. I think that a lot of us, depending on where we are in our lives, just have had to develop hyper independence skills, right? But hyper independence is a trauma response. It's a program that we were, probably taught and socially conditioned to have early in our lives. And it shows up to save us, to take care of us, but it actually causes us more damage than good. And so, having that compassionate self-awareness and possibly kind of challenging yourself in those moments to start just knowing I probably could use some help here. And then when you're ready, asking for help from those people that you feel like you can. So that was the area of self-awareness. Do you have any questions about that or anything else that I didn't pick up on that you were curious about?
I don't really have questions about that. And it's an area that I know that I need to work on.
Yeah, because you literally said that later. So I was like, yay, yeah, we're already ahead of the game.
I know I need to be okay with asking for help when I need it. And I don't like to do it because then it lets other people know that you can't do everything by yourself.
Right. Right.
So that sucks.
Yep.
And that goes back to, I call it a trauma response. And I think that little girls do get taught this real directly when they're younger, that like you should be able to do this on your own, and that your worthiness is contingent on that. If you've had to ask for help to be a mom, to be a wife, to be a whatever you are in your life, you start to feel really self-conscious and like you're not mustering up in the world. That started long before the roles of our adult life, long before. So, we can let go and have some compassion towards ourselves, that our own common humanity as women is we didn't get here not being hyper independent, but hyper independence is a trauma response that the world taught us to be when it didn't know what to do with us or how to make us function, whatever. So that's a podcast I could talk for hours on that subject. So I won't go into it further here, but it's something that comes with all of us and is probably a place we all can be working on. And what was beautiful is to see, yeah, you did know that. You also had self-awareness of it. Later in the document, I asked that question more outright, and you answered that saying, yeah, absolutely. This is an area of growth I would like to see myself work through. So props. All right. So then we got to self-compassion, where, for somebody who's been through one of my programs, I was actually pretty happy to see I had seen some improvement. I didn't have you guys take questionnaires like this prior to my group coaching. I probably will from this point forward have something similar from my group coaching packages so that I can monitor kind of where were you in the beginning and at the end. But I can say that because I know you, that it's mildly low, but it's better than where I remember you being at. So you've definitely improved in your ability to be to see your own common humanity, to be understanding and know that common humanity is a thing, but you're still struggling with some of those smaller things about showing yourself kindness and, being your own champion and lifting yourself up. If somebody else needs it in your life, I bet you're Johnny on the spot. But when it's for you, you're still kind of in some of that past way of thinking and believing about yourself in a very self-critical manner. Does that fit for you, Amy? Does that sound right?
Oh, absolutely. That fits with my inner perfectionist, which goes hand in hand with the part of me that does not like to ask for help when I need it.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't
it
funny?
Together.
Isn't it funny how that happens? So these are like, they're kind of working with one another. Well, I'm glad to hear that you see it that way too, because I think in some of the highlights and then later in some of the suggestions I give you, I'm actually having you combine those two in how you're getting your needs met. So you'll see a little bit later kind of the method to my madness with that. So the third category is self-empowerment, and self-empowerment is an interesting category. So I'm teaching skill sets to women in my group coaching around, or in my courses, around this idea that we are kind of swimming in the soup of what we've been conditioned to do all of our lives. So, 90% of what makes Natalie is a habit of what I did the day before there and the day before that and the day before that. And I want you to uncover what's in that 90%. I want you to take a good look at it. And I want you to decide, is it still serving you? And then make empowered decisions in the places where it's not, to choose differently for yourself. Amy, you've already given us a great example of that by sharing with us, this career kind of consideration that you saw younger people kind of, man, if something in their job was going in a way they didn't like, they just switch jobs. And here you are, career woman, 2 decades into a job, as you're starting to notice this and you're thinking, I've never questioned that you get to leave a job. Like, I just stayed because most of it was good. And this is what we do. We put up with jobs and, we'll retire someday or something to that effect. And so that was some programming and conditioning that I remember in group coaching, you were able to finally reach, like, maybe that idea doesn't serve me. It doesn't mean I need to quit my job tomorrow, but it doesn't serve me to just have to stay here without question either.
That is a very, very big thing in conditioning. I think when my friends and I, who are parenting new college students, talk about how many kids are choosing a different route than college right now, And the fact that all of us just expected we would finish high school and go to college and finish college and go to work. That was what we were programmed and conditioned to do. And kind of what we programmed and conditioned our kids to do because it was what we were expected.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are struggling with our kids who have said, oh no, this is not going to work. I'm not going to be 45 and owe $100,000 for school. I'm not doing that. And they've made other choices. That's hard.
Yeah.
And it was hard to look at what was going on with my job and to realize I worked for somebody who did not care about the health, safety, and well-being of the most vulnerable students in their school. And I couldn't be a part of that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I quit and left in the middle of the school year, which no teachers don't normally do that.
Teachers that have taught that same position for 2 decades definitely don't usually do that. You were in a very, very small 0.0001% group at that point. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you would say that your compassionate self-awareness, your ability to see that programming had really kept you there for a long time and decide this doesn't serve me, all kind of fed into that decision-making process.
Not only did it not serve me, but it didn't serve the students that I was supposed to advocate for when my voice was silenced and there was no more I could do to help them.
Right.
I needed to leave so somebody else could step in and hopefully help get the needs met for those kids in a way that I was never going to be able to do under the leadership that I was under.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll just share with my listeners. So one of the things that you're hearing from Amy's example here, her story here, is that she is in a much more accelerated place in getting into that centered life experience where she's thriving. And that's really what I saw in the self-empowerment section for her. So for her, I think she's there. I think that she's doing the things she needs to be doing. And what you'll see in my highlights for her and in the recommendations that I make for what she can do next, what you're going to get is just some information about how she can continue on that pathway. But she's already done the lion's share of work to get herself poised in that position. And that in the questionnaire for the midlife mastery evaluation is what I'm looking at, is kind of where are you at as far as that midlife funk, that midlife unraveling, to use Brene Brown's language instead of midlife crisis, because I don't think that we ever feel like we're at a crisis level unless there's a very small percentage of us that get there before we start to switch it. Most of us are just in discomfort with the things that aren't working in our life. And so for Amy, that I've seen this process front to back. I know exactly where she's at. And so I can say she's ahead of the game. She is not your average bear in this, because she's done a lot of work already to put herself in the position that she's in. So I'll move on to self-care. Self-care is obviously one of the most essential categories. It's so funny that I put it number 4, but I said earlier why I do that, because I really feel like you need to layer those first 3 sets of skill sets before you can do this correctly. And what I can see from her results, from Amy's results, is that she is doing it correctly. She has a great asset with it. And I actually break it down into physical, professional, spiritual, social, and emotional self-care. And the only area that she was a little bit below average in was that emotional self-care, which wasn't surprising to me. When someone is highly self-critical of themselves or has that perfectionist mentality and is still really trying to shift out of that programming and conditioning, what I find is that they're really great in their self-care that they can see in their outward life, but they're not as great in the self-care realm of the things that happen on the inside of their life. And Amy is a bit of a social butterfly. And so her social self-care, but even her spiritual self-care, the way that she had answered those questions, I could tell that she's seeing it by seeing it in her people, in her community.
And so emotional self-care is just a harder thing to gauge for somebody who has been so self-critical that being on the inside of you just in general got conditioned as something that feels uncomfortable. We feel more comfortable when we're in our community, when we're even by ourselves, but we're looking outward in our life to decide whether or not we're doing well or not. And that was really what I picked up on in your self-care section. Do you have any other thoughts about that, Amy?
No, other than how accurate it's surprising how accurate that is.
Yep. Psychological testing is fun. At the heart, I'm a scientist. And so I'm like, ah. But when it works, it works. And I've used, some of the questions that I'm using are from these content areas. Like there are actual psychological assessments I could administer to you. And I've just kind of borrowed some of the content of those and tried to map it into my own survey so that I can get that information for you. All right. And then finally, what we're all trying to arrive at is this idea of growth mindset. And growth mindset is a concept by Carol Dweck of Stanford University. So if you've never heard about this idea, please look her up. It's a brilliant, a whole bunch of literature on this, but she kind of sees it as a continuum from fixed black and white thinking to growth mindset, where you have all this agility and ability to kind of grow and change all throughout your life. And what I want to do is leave you closer to that growth mindset part of the continuum by the end of your experience with my courses, with group coaching, with individual coaching now that I'm offering it, with these experiences with the midlife mastery evaluation process. So growth mindset really is about helping you just be in that more agile place where you can ebb and flow and grow. And Amy definitely has that. She's a teacher, so that was not a surprise. She's a teacher, so she has a growth mindset.
Other people.
Exactly. So it wasn't surprising to me that she had that. Her answers only wavered when it came to and what I picked up on, and I don't ask these questions outright, but Amy, correct me if I'm wrong. What I picked up on is that sometimes trusting that others will have growth is where you struggle the most. Yourself, yes, probably your little student minds, yes. But it sounds like maybe there are some relationships that have, programmed or conditioned you to have a little bit more of a scarcity mindset. Like, I'm not going to expect other people to grow. I will grow, but other people, I'm not so sure. And so I try to define my life around that. Does that sound right?
A little bit. And some of the questions were worded in a way for me as a special education teacher who does intelligence testing and academic achievement testing. So when it says intelligence doesn't change over time, my brain immediately goes to when we're measuring your IQ scores.
Yeah.
Those change very little over time, and that may have impacted how I answered those questions too.
Now that you say that, that makes sense.
That doesn't really change. Like,
no. No, that doesn't. When you're a special ed teacher, and we're supposed to be kind of coming up with this number that kind of travels across a lifetime. Okay, that makes sense. I also was wondering if it fed into this little triad of self-critical thinking and perfectionism, having difficulty asking for help, and then maybe trust with other people, being able to be have the capacity for growth mindset. And so I thought maybe that was kind of a triangle that was showing up for you, but it doesn't sound like that might be it. It might just have been kind of your literal interpretation of the questions given your background. Okay.
Given the work I do, that is very related to the work that you do.
Truth.
Just looking at how that was worded, I was maybe a little too literal in my
I got it.
Thinking about my response.
Okay. All right. So here are some highlights. Even within the highlights, I have some suggestions already that you can see, but I wanted to just start with strength. So your strength is self-care for certain. You're doing a really good job with that. I would say self-awareness also is kind of a counterbalance strength for you as well. And so stay in Keep doing what you're doing in those areas for sure. You may want to add some self-care that shows you self-kindness. That would be one area, Amy, that I would say you could keep expanding on. So it's a counterbalance directly to perfectionism is how do
Yes.
I let myself move from perfectionism to looking for excellence? And how do I honor mistakes as my pursuit to excellence instead of some sort of, description of I'm failing or I'm not enough or any of that kind of scarcity mindset. So that's kind of what I would try to build in is giving yourself some new things to do, giving yourself some new, ways of looking at and doing things that allow you to have some wiggle room in your perfectionism, and then try on staying kind with yourself during that, if that makes sense. And I would include more social engagement to improve that trust in others. If indeed, part of what is in the way of asking for help is just not knowing who you can ask for help from. If it's not, then take that with a grain of salt. It's a guess from what the results said. Your second highlight is that you have a tendency to be critical of yourself and the situation when it's challenging. So what I would say is don't push away emotions, feel them and move through them. And that might be something that you do on your own. I think you're definitely capable with all the skill sets that she showed. It could be something that you explore, seeing a counselor for a little bit to help you build the skills and capacity to have that inward focus. But definitely, it's hard to do emotional self-care and emotional check-in on the inside when you've spent a lifetime trying to push away from that or interpreting it as uncomfortable. And really the best way to do that is just to feel your feelings. And again, giving yourself permission to make mistakes and putting it in a new light. Like I'm, challenging myself to be the best of what I can be in each and every day. But I have this growth mindset, which says that tomorrow I'll be better than I am today. That means that I get to honor and celebrate the times where I fall because it's all in pursuit of the excellence, not perfection, because I don't arrive. I never arrive, but I'm always in pursuit of that excellence. And then the third highlight is asking for help is hard. And what I was really excited to see is you desire to improve that, right? So journal and reflect on the areas that you might still be a little hyper independent in and start to build more compassionate self-awareness of that. That's where I would start. Once you feel like you got a handle on where are the places where I block myself the most in asking for help, then start to challenge yourself to ask for help in those areas and choose people that you trust a ton so it doesn't disrupt that process for you. Don't, the very first time that you go out on a limb and ask for help, ask somebody new at your new job that you're not sure is going to be somebody that'll follow through, because the story of I should be hyper independent will get reinforced. And I do call it a trauma response. I'm a trauma therapist because I do think it's a collective trauma that women have experienced. And so I really want us to set ourselves up for success when we first start asking for help. And it's okay to start with low-hanging fruit, things that are easy, and of the people that are most likely to be reliable for us. Any questions about any of those highlights for you?
Not questions. I totally agree that hyper independence is a trauma response. Having boatloads of training in that as a foster parent and an educator, it very much is.
Yeah. And it's a collective women's experience. Like,
yes.
I don't say trauma lightly because I am a trauma therapist, and I'm saying trauma intentionally because women were traumatized. We were traumatized into believing that our worthiness came from other people's evaluation of our merit. That's a really sucky way to live our lives, right? And midlife is often the place where that discomfort of what? Like, does that doesn't even make sense. It's like the first time we start questioning it, which is great, but it's also a really delicate thing. And so I don't want you to re-traumatize or reinforce this really bad narrative that we were fed. So be careful with this one for sure. Be sure that you're not doing things unless you're within a window of being able to handle it. And once you're able to handle it, you've journaled, you've thought about it, you've done those things, then ask only where you know you'll get a yes, essentially. That's where you should start. Okay.
Yes.
And then the last page here that we'll talk about is just some next steps. And some of this will be echoed from what I was already giving you some suggestions for in the highlight section, but self-kindness is an area that I definitely would suggest you keep working on. Trying self-care that really is geared at this. People will ask me, well, how do you do self-care for self-kindness? That seems kind of odd. And it may have less to do with the content of the self-care that you're doing, but rather it's about the intention. So, these are the times where you come home from work and there's dishes in the sink and there's laundry and you want to, crawl into bed and go to sleep and don't want to have to do any of these things, but you have this belief system that you need to get those things done. And in fact, like many of us, you'd get those things done and you do feel good because dishes are put away and laundry is done. There is some self-reinforcement in there for some of us, not for all of us, that you in that moment choose to do a thing that is just kind for you instead of any of the stuff that you would normally program yourself to do. So you're not escaping it with sleep. You're not necessarily doing those dishes or laundry unless it's like you say, I just need it to function for tonight. So I'm going to wash 2 dishes because I need to make dinner and I'm going to wash the clothes I need to wear tomorrow. That's it. That's all I'm asking of myself. And then the rest of the night, I'm going to do, this kind act for myself, which might be sitting down and reading or something, watching my favorite TV show, going for a walk. So it's less about the content and more about the intention behind that you are a valuable commodity in your life. You're a valuable asset in your life and you need to take care of her. And in that moment, when she walked in and she saw that and was like washed over with overwhelm, that you stepped up for her and did a kind thing for her. That's the kind of self-care that I'm talking about. Any questions with that?
No, those are the kinds of things that I've been working on doing.
Good.
For myself. And what do I absolutely have to do so that tomorrow is easier?
Right. Yes. Those are great ones. Yes.
The rest of it can wait, but what
Yep.
do I need just for tomorrow?
Yep.
One of my support staff that works in my classroom with my students kind of giggled on Thursday morning when she realized what I was doing during the day was kind of making a mental list of the things I needed to do after school to make tomorrow a little bit better, because she was starting to see it
Yeah.
that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I said, yeah, you're right. I am kind of going home and checking off a few things that I need to do so that tomorrow is easier.
Right. Exactly.
Day.
I can't think of her name off the top of my head. I'm just going to kick myself about this, but her book is called How to Keep House While Drowning. And she's another mental health professional. And she wrote this book, I think right after her second, like not right after, but after she had her second child. It's kind of a reflection of all of these cycles of house care stuff have gotten moralized in our perfectionist mind. So like doneness equals you're good as a person and not doneness equals you're bad as a person. And all of this self-loathing is, just really burdening women who get stuck in those cycles. And so she'll take it like it's a functioning, like there is no moral high ground or low ground with chores. They're just something that keeps us functioning, and they all have these cycles. But then you can kind of step outside it and ask questions like that, like what would help me most? What would help me most is that I'd have lunch for tomorrow, and that I feel like my morning routine is cut in half because all this and this is done. Okay, well then I am gonna do a couple dishes and cook a dinner and have leftovers for tomorrow and do. So it changes the whole narrative for you. Instead of like, I'm a bad person if I don't clean these dishes. Who the fuck want the dishes? Nobody cares. No, but you've been programmed to care, right? And so I just really like that author's philosophy. I will definitely put a link in the notes if you want to go back and see her book.
Yeah, it's definitely a what can I do today that my tomorrow self will really thank me for.
Yeah.
And when I started doing Sunday dinners for my family, which I know is like this super old fashioned thing that our grandmas did, it meant that one day a week I cooked a really good meal. It still does,
Mm-hmm.
because the rest of the week I don't have time for that. And that I cleaned my house enough that when my grandma came into my house, she wasn't going to have something to say about how dirty it was.
So brilliant.
If I need the kitchen, the dining room, and the bathroom and living room that are clean enough for that, I can shut the doors for everything else.
So brilliant. So brilliant. I love it.
And so it's still a thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think that this author also talks about that. Like, if we have routines, that sometimes that practice becomes its own form of self-care. It's just to do the routine instead
Yeah.
of getting into the moral thinking of, is this good or not good? It's like, no, I'm just showing up for myself. My routine is what helps me feel like I'm on top of all of that stuff. So that's brilliant. And I'm glad that it has
Yeah.
kept going for you into perpetuity so that it's still helpful for you.
And it's that those rituals and routines keep everybody going. They keep our kids going, they keep our parents going, they keep everybody
Going.
kind of putting one foot in front of the other when everything else goes to shit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's how we keep going.
That is how you keep going. All right. So more social time, which not hard for you. But I do know that life is busy when you're working. So more social time. And in particular, I'm trying to kind of blend a few things for you. So some of your answers show that it would be helpful to keep branching out so that you have more people that you feel safe asking for help from. You may be kind of in your routines surrounding yourself with the same people all the time, but then you've kind of already vetted all those folks. So you know who's going to be the trustworthy ones and who's not. And so be thinking about it from the standpoint of, as I'm self-reflecting and journaling about where are these areas that I'm being hyper independent, that I'm counterbalancing that with also getting myself out there, seeing more people and vetting and seeing if there's more people who could be somebody I'd ask for help from, like I'll ask them for help with this small thing, and I'll ask them for help with this small thing, because those are the kinds of things you want to know to set yourself up for success. Any questions about that?
Nope.
Okay. And then try something new, or a lot of somethings. So I think that one of the best answers to perfection
right now.
Well,
it's hard.
I do think that one of the best answers, though, to perfectionism is just failing over and over, like being awkward and making mistakes and celebrating the process of learning, which you're a teacher, so you know the value of this, instead of celebrating the end game of, oh, and now it all looks pretty and has a bow on top of it. So I want you to be trying new things with this intention of rejoicing and celebrating in the process of the learning and getting there and challenging yourself to be excellent, instead of only rewarding yourself when you arrive, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But it could be hard. I mean, I'm making you go do social time. I want you to try some new things. I get it. Like, you also have to balance that with your actual life. So don't be too worried. I'm not trying to create a whole host of other things to be mad at yourself that you haven't gotten to yet either. These are just suggestions, next steps. You could take a whole couple years to fold all this in over time. You got time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then finally, acceptance and letting go. I think that sometimes we can get caught in the rut of looking for a new outcome, doing the same patterns of behavior. And so instead of doing that, accept that the outcome you're seeking won't come from your old patterns, that you're actually going to have to try something new. And this also, again, blends in with the whole trying to break that perfectionism, trying to be a little bit more kind to self instead of critical to self. I mean, it goes with all of that, but it in of itself is a thinking strategy, acceptance and letting go, that is just a useful strategy that can get applied in all of those
After
areas.
all of that, Anything, any thoughts? What did you think of the midlife mastery? Do you feel like it sends you on a path with some ideas of what to be doing?
It does, and it's good to know that there are some of those things that I'm already doing.
You
So
are.
it's just reaffirming what I'm doing. And I know that, like, for instance, last night, hating my job after 4 days of something completely new and different with people who are new and different and systems that are new and different. And that I know part of that is just frustration in that I don't know what I don't know yet.
Yeah,
And I know
exactly.
about me.
Yeah, that's a tough
So
one. That's a tough one. But I love that your reframe really is, of course, I'm going to feel it uncomfortable and icky because all of it's new and I'm still trying to adjust. And so giving yourself space for that. And man, if at any point in your life you'd be ripe for some self-kindness, self-care, it's now, because that really is the best counterbalance to times like that when you're undergoing a lot of change all at the same time that way. Somebody's got to take care of you underneath all of that, right? Are you liking what you're hearing today in this podcast episode? Oh, I am so glad. I love being able to really touch people in a place where they need the help, right? So I have two requests of you. The first one, could you just think of one person in your life that also could hear this message? I bet you could. And what I'd ask you to do is when you're done listening today, why don't you just take the link and send it to that person, right? Let them have a chance to also gain from this the way that you are today. And then the second thing that I would request that you do is make sure that you're following me where you get your podcasts. Like, comment. I even on Spotify have questions each and every week. Use any of those outlets because it does help me help you. What I gather from that information is what you want to hear about. And then I make sure that these podcasts are relevant to what Thank you so much, Amy, for being on with us. It has been a real delight to be able to walk you through this process. And for my listeners, thank you for listening to this. This was our inaugural podcast. So if you've ever thought about doing this midlife mastery evaluation with me, you've just watched me walk through a whole one with you. It's only about 60 questions that you need to answer. I give you this really beautiful report with specific recommendations just for you, and we walk through it for about an hour, right? So I really strongly encourage you to go back to the notes for this podcast. So either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, click on that link to set up your midlife mastery evaluation, your one-on-one deep dive call with me, and we will get to the bottom what's getting in the way of you continuing to progress into that centered life thriving. All right. So I'm adding a little addition here. It's the legal stuff. Just so you're aware, nothing in any of these podcasts constitutes actual psychotherapy. Yes, I am a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Minnesota, but everything here is just educational in nature and is a suggestion of things that you could be doing in your own life to learn how to love the life that you're in instead of waiting for a life that you're dreaming of to come towards you. So just remember, this is not therapy. And if ever you need any resources for mental health, look in my notes and I'll always have a little blurb at the bottom where you can click on a link and get those services for yourself.